Hey gang, and welcome back. Just a reminder, you can now use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, at flipsidegaming.com. You'll get 10% off orders over $10 and help with the channel at the same time. Welcome back, lovely viewers, to another EDH gameplay video. This week we have some new faces and some new commanders. Ben, who you'll remember from a previous game, is playing his Queen Marchesa deck and keeps a hand with Plains, Nomad Outpost, Mountain, Return to Dust, Leech-Ridden Swamp, Orzhov Signet, and Vishkal, Blood Arbiter. Tim, who's new to the channel, is playing his Chainer deck and keeps a hand with 3 Swamps, Journeyer's Kite, Fleshbag Marauder, Mutilate, and Decree of Pain. Tal, who's also new to the channel, is playing his Gahiji deck and keeps a hand with Cinderglade, Forest, Arcane Lighthouse, Elixir of Immortality, Fungal Sprouting, Gruul Warchant, and Eternal Witness. Last but not least, we have Kirsten playing her Shattergang deck and keeps a hand with Beetlemac Chief, Parallel Lives, Terastodon, Skullclamp, Swamp, Forest, and Sylvan Ranger. Tim wins the die roll and starts us off. Tim plays a Swamp and passes. Kirsten plays a Forest and casts a Stoneforge Masterwork. Tal plays a Cinderglade and passes to Ben. Ben plays a Leech-Ridden Swamp and passes turn. Tim plays a Swamp and casts Journeyer's Kite. Kirsten plays a Swamp and casts a Rampant Growth. She grabs a Mountain and passes to Tal. Tal plays a Forest and casts Elixir of Immortality. Ben plays a Mountain and casts an Orzhov Signet. Tim plays a Swamp and simply passes turn. Kirsten plays a Sylvan Ranger and gets to go and grab a Mountain and puts it in her hand. She then plays said Mountain and casts a Skull Clamp. Kirsten then pays 1 to clamp the Ranger, drawing 2 as it dies. She then passes to Tal. Tal plays an Arcane Lighthouse as his land for turn and passes. Ben plays a Plains and casts Queen Marchesa. Ben becomes a Monarch and draws at the end of his turn. At the end of Ben's turn as well, Tim activates the Kite to go and grab a Swamp, putting it into his hand. Tim drops a Swamp and passes turn. Kirsten continues to ramp like wild, casting Cultivate to find a Swamp and a Forest. She puts the Forest onto the field and passes to Tal. Tal pays 3 in his main phase to cast Attempt with Vengeance, where X is 2. Ben and Tim pass on the offer, but Kirsten opts to take 2 tokens. This gives Tal 2 more, and Tal moves to combat. He swings 1 at Ben, who lets the token through. Tal then becomes the Monarch, and at his end step he gets to draw a card. Ben plays a Mountain and remembers he gets an Assassin on his upkeep. He then pays 3 to cast Underworld Connections on his Mountain. Ben then passes turn, and Tim finds a Swamp with his Kite at the end of turn. Tim plays a Swamp for his turn. Kirsten also plays a Swamp and pays 4 to cast Parallel Lives. She then casts Throne of the God Pharaoh and swings both of her tokens at Tim. Tim takes 2, and moving to her end step, all of her opponents take 2 from the Throne trigger. Tal plays a Plains for his turn and hits Kirsten for 1 with his token. Tal then draws from the Monarch trigger at the end of his turn and discards an Ogre Battle Driver. At the end of Tal's turn, Ben taps his enchanted land to lose 1 and draw a card. Ben gets another Assassin on his turn and plays a Swamp and pays 4 to cast Return to Dust in his main phase. He exiles Kirsten's Parallel Lives and Skullclamp. At the end of Ben's turn, Tim unsurprisingly finds another Swamp thanks to his Kite. Tim does a repeat of his last turn, playing a Swamp and discarding down to 7. Kirsten plays a Beetleback Chief in her main phase, gaining 2 Goblin tokens. She then plays a Gruul Turf, bouncing a Mountain back to her hand, and moves to combat, swinging her Elementals at Tim. At the end of her combat step though, Tal uses Beast Within to destroy the throne, and Kirsten passes her turn. Tal plays a Plains for his land drop and casts Gahiji. He then moves to his end step and draws a card from the Monarch. At the end of his turn as well, Ben uses the Underworld Connections to lose 1 life and draw a card. Ben gains another Assassin token and plays a Mountain and casts a Mirage Mirror. At the end of Ben's turn, Tim finds a Swamp once more with a Kite, trying to get some better draws. For Tim's turn, he plays a Swamp and discards another Swamp before passing turn. Kirsten replays her Mountain and casts the Shattergang Bros. She then pays 3 and sacrifices a creature, forcing everyone else to sacrifice a creature. Tim finally gets in the game though, and he cycles Decree of Pain to give all creatures -2/-2 and draws a card. This neuters most people's board, and Tal and Ben are forced to sacrifice their commanders, having no tokens left. Moving to combat, Kirsten swings her beast at Tal for 1 and becomes the Monarch. Long live the Queen. She then passes turn and draws a card. Tal plays a Forest and pays 6 to cast Collective Blessings. At the end of Tal's turn, Ben once more taps the Underworld Connection to lose 1 and draw 1. Ben plays a tapped Nomad Outpost for his land for turn, and then pays 4 to cast Whip of Erebos. He then passes to Tim, and for the first time in a long while, Tim can't pay to search for a Swamp. Tim plays a Swamp for his turn and casts an Expedition map. With nothing else, he passes turn. Kirsten plays a Forest for her turn and casts Perforos. She then casts Hellrider, and everyone takes 2. She then passes turn and draws from being the Monarch. Tal plays a Mountain and casts an Eternal Witness to return Beast Within to his hand. Tal then casts a Fungal Sprouting, giving him 5 tokens as his Eternal Witness is a 5/4. At the end of turn, Ben once again loses 1 to draw a card. Ben plays a Grixis Panorama for his land for turn, and casts a Harvester of Souls. Tim cracks his Expedition map, and activates his Kite at the end of turn, finding a Swamp and a Cabal Coffers. Tim plays Cabal Coffers, and activates to generate 8 black mana. He then casts Life's Finale, targeting Ben. Ben gets to draw 2 cards from the other creatures dying, and pays 1 life to draw a card from the connections, before Tim then gets to go through his library. Tim grabs Shriekmaw, Sidisi Undead Vizier, and Kakusho. Tim then uses 3 lands and the 2 black floating to cast Chainer before passing to Kirsten. On Kirsten's upkeep, Ben casts Swords to Plowshares, targeting Chainer. Tim responds and activates Chainer, taking 3 life and paying 3 mana to reanimate Sidisi Undead Vizier. He has the Sidisi exploit herself and tutors for a card. He then gains 3 life from the Swords resolving. Kirsten then moves to her main phase and plays a Bojuka Bog to take out Ben's graveyard, which is probably a good call. She then casts a Terastodon, targeting Cabal Coffers, Mirage Mirror, and Collective Blessings. Everyone also loses 2 from Perforos as the Terastodon enters the battlefield. She then passes turn and draws from Monarch. Tal pays 6 to cast a Rishkar's Expertise, draws 3 cards, and casts a Lifecrafter's Bestiary. He then plays a Temple of Triumph and keeps the card on top. Ben plays a Command Tower and casts a Solemn Simulacrum. He grabs a Swamp and brings out Queen Marchesa, becoming the Monarch. Ben then ends his turn and draws a card. Tim plays a Swamp and casts a Cryptcast. Tim then taps 1 Swamp to cast Viscera Seer and pays to extort. Tim then drops a Shieldred, extorting again, and moves to combat. He swings his Elephant token at Ben, who takes 3, and Tim becomes the Monarch. At the end of his turn, Tim draws a card. On Kirsten's upkeep, she has to sacrifice the only creature she has, Terastodon. Kirsten then casts a Wart Bogart Auntie in her main phase, and the table takes 2. She then drops a Sakura Tribe Elder, and the table takes a further 2. Kirsten then plays a Golgari Rot Farm as her land for turn, and returns a Bojuka Bog to her hand. Tal sacrifices his elephant on his upkeep, and keeps the card on top he scryed. He then plays a mountain, and casts a Sandworm Convergence. Tal then moves to his end step, gaining a worm token. Ben sacrifices his Solemn on his upkeep, drawing a card and gaining an Assassin, and plays a mountain before casting Zulaport Cutthroat. Ben then casts Dusk to destroy all creatures with power greater than 3, and Tim sacrifices Shoulder to the Seer to scry and bottom the card. Ben does lose his own elephant though, which triggers the Cutthroat, who deals 1 to Ben's opponents, and he gains 1. Ben then casts a Throll Parasite and passes turn. At the end of Ben's turn, Kirsten sacrifices her Elder to find a mountain and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Tim plays a Swamp and casts Beseech the Queen, extorting it. He reveals a Runescar Demon and puts it into his hand. Tim then casts said demon and extorts it again, draining everyone for another 1 before tutoring for his second card for the turn. Tim finds and casts Mindslicer, also extorting it. Tim then continues the extort train by casting a Charcoal Diamond and paying the extra 1 black or white for it. Tim then sacrifices the Mindslicer to the Viscera Seer, and Ben wants to use it before he loses it, so he casts Terminate, targeting the Cryptcast. Tim responds to the spell in the stack and sacrifices the cast to the Seer, getting another scry. Tim then scries twice, bottoming the top card both times. Everyone then discards their hand, and Tim swings the Seer at Kirsten for 1. At the end of his turn, Tim draws from the Monarch. Kirsten plays a Commander Sphere during her first main phase, floating 1 and sacrificing it to draw a card. She then plays a Forest and pays to recast the Shattergang Bros. This has everyone taking 2 from Perforos, and she passes turn. On Tal's turn, he responds to his own scry trigger by sacrificing the Elixir, gaining 5 and shuffling his graveyard into his library. Tal then bottoms the top card he scryed and casts Assemble the Legion in his main phase. At the end of Tal's end step, he gains a Worm, and Ben activates his Underworld Connection to lose 1 and draw 1. Ben recasts Queen Marchesa in his main phase and becomes the Monarch, paying 1 to extort because Tim made it look so good. Ben then plays a Caves of Koilos as his land for turn and activates the connections to lose 1 and draw 1. Ben then activates Leech-Ridden Swamp to deal 1 to all of his opponents and swings his Assassin at Kirsten for 1, gaining 1. At the end of Ben's turn, he draws a card and passes to Tim. Tim recasts Chainer in his main phase and moves to combat. He swings the Demon at Ben for 6 and retakes the Monarchy. At the end of Tim's turn, he draws a card. Kirsten draws for her turn and casts Artisan's Sorrow in her main phase to destroy Assemble the Legion. She gets to scry 2 and keeps both on top before passing to Tal. Tal scries the top card and keeps it on top before drawing it. Moving to combat, Tal swings his Worm at Tim for 5. He becomes the Monarch and moves to his end step, gaining a Worm and drawing a card. Ben casts Falconwrath Aristocrat during his main phase and pays to extort it. Ben then plays a Temple of Silence and keeps the card on top. He then uses the connections to lose 1 life and draw a card. Ben then loses 1 more life from the caves to give him a white mana to cast Yosei. Ben then sacrifices the Zulaport Cutthroat to the Noble, and everyone loses 1 while Ben gains 1. The Noble then gains a +1/+1 counter and becomes indestructible until end of turn. Ben then sacrifices Yosei and targets Tim's 4 remaining Swamps and Viscera Seer. With the ability on the stack, Tim sacrifices the Rune-Scarred Demon to the Viscera Seer to scry 1. He keeps the card on top, and still responding to the Yosei trigger, Tim pays 3 mana and 3 life to reanimate the demon he just sacrificed. Tim then gets to tutor for a card, and Ben moves to combat swinging his 2 hasty assassins at Tim. Tim takes the 2, and Ben gains 2. Tim's turn is pretty lackluster without a chance to untap, so he draws for turn and passes. Kirsten taps out on her turn to cast Grenzo Dungeon Warden, and pays 9 for the X. This has Grenzo hitting the field as an 11/11, and all of her opponents lose 2 life from Perforos. She then activates Grenzo's ability, but sadly hits a land. Tal scries 1, keeping it on top and drawing it. He then plays a Plains and casts Mirari's Wake. Tal then taps 4 lands to create 8 mana, and recasts his General for 7, paying 1 green to draw from the Bestiary trigger. Tim pays 4 life to destroy Gahiji with Snuff Out. This helps Tal decide where he wants to swing, and he swings both of his worms at Tim for 12. Tim blocks one of them with his Rune-Scarred Demon, who is pumped to a 7/7 with Chainer, and takes 6. At the end of turn, Tal gets another worm token. Ben plays a mountain for his turn, and casts from his graveyard the Dawn half of Dusk. He gets to return Zulaport Cutthroat and Solemn Simulacrum to his hand. Ben then casts Ashes of the Abhorrent and extorts it. Ben then extorts his Zulaport Cutthroat, and then draws and loses 1 life from the Underworld Connections ability. At the end of Ben's turn, Tim sacrifices the demon to scry 1. He bottoms the card and draws for turn. Tim activates his Chainer in his main phase, taking 3 to bring back the Rune-Scarred Demon. He tutors for a card and casts a Disciple of Bolas, sacrificing the Rune-Scarred Demon, who is as comfortable on the field as it is in Tim's graveyard. Tim then gains 7 life and draws 7 cards. Ben also gains 1 from the Ashes as a creature died. Tim then moves to his end step, discarding down to 7, one of which is Big Game Hunter, which he pays the Madness cost for. He targets Ben's Noble, but Ben sacrifices one of the Assassins to give it indestructible. This has everyone lose 1 life, and Ben gains 1 from the Cutthroat trigger. Kirsten plays a Cabal Slaver in her main phase, and everyone takes 2 from the Perforos. Kirsten then activates Grenzo's ability several times and hits Goblin Assault, a Mountain, and finds Butcher of Malakir. This triggers Perforos once more, dealing 2 to everyone. She then activates Shattergang Bros to sacrifice a creature, forcing everyone to sacrifice 2. Tim uses this as an opportunity to cast Murderous Cut to kill Ben's Zulaport Cutthroat before the sacrifice triggers resolve. This has everyone losing 1 and Ben gaining 1 from the Cutthroat dying. Everyone then sacrifices 2 creatures, and Kirsten passes. Tal scries the top card and puts it on the bottom. He then casts a Crystal Ball and activates it scrying 2. Tal puts both back on top and spends 9 mana to recast his commander. On cast, he pays 1 green to draw a card. Tal then casts Rishkar's Expertise, which he has redrawn after shuffling his graveyard back into his library, and draws 5 cards before casting Sram's Expertise for free. Tal gains 3 colorless servo creatures, and also gets to cast a card that costs 3 or less, which Spear of Heliod just so happens to be. Tal then moves to his end step and gains a worm. Ben plays a Plains and casts Blind Obedience, paying 1 for the Extort. Ben then casts Gaunty and extorts it twice, and has it enter the battlefield targeting Tim. Ben picks 1 and Tim bottoms the rest. Ben then casts Rise from the Grave, extorting the spell and targeting the Zulaport Cutthroat. Tim then pays 3 and 3 life to steal out from under Ben. Moving to combat, Ben swings a Noble at Tim and takes him out of the game. Kirsten draws for her turn and activates Grendo's ability again. Ben responds to the trigger by using his Underworld connection to lose 1 and draw a card. Kirsten then resolves the Grenzo ability, failing to hit a creature on her first 2 activations, before finding a creature on her third, who has Perforos deal 2 when it enters. She then activates Grenzo's ability once more, and hits a Warren Pilferer, who triggers Perforos again when it enters. Moving to combat, Kirsten swings her Butcher of Malakir at Ben, and activates Perforos' second ability to pump it by +1/+0. It also gets +2/0 from Gahiji, and deals a total of 8 damage to Ben. Tal scries the top card, keeping it there before drawing it. He then casts Cast Ouch, which exiles Ben's Blind Obedience upon entering. Tal then scries 2 with Crystal Ball before casting Shamanic Revelation and gains 8 life before drawing 5. He then plays a Blighted Woodlands and drops his copy of Parallel Lives. Tal then taps out for 8 mana, leaving up 1 red and 1 green. Tal casts Tempt with Vengeance, where X is 5. Unfortunately, even if Kirsten took the deal, Tal would still be alive and gain 10 additional tokens, so Ben and Kirsten both agreed to not take any tokens. Tal still gets his original 10, and casts Destructive Revelry to destroy Ben's Whip of Erebos, and also deal 2 to Ben. Moving to combat, he swings 6 tokens at Kirsten and the rest of his stuff at Ben, killing both of them and winning the game. Game review time. So I don't have very much to say about this game, mostly because my throat hurts and I don't want to talk and waste my voice too much. To summarize quickly, Kirsten's deck with Goblin Tribal, while Tal was focused more on building tokens with Gahiji deck. Ben's Queen Marchesa was more focused on the idea of making his opponents fight over Monarch and then sweeping in to win, while Tim was playing a very reanimation heavy Chainer deck, focusing on stealing creatures at instant speed. Hopefully we'll be able to see these decks again in action in the future, and until then, take care. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta, and lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in part by support from my Patreons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit my Patreon link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.